Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Data Summit, Accessing Census Bureau Data for Rural Communities. We're delighted to have you with us as part of the Census Bureau's 2021 Data Summit series. My name is Susan Licata, Media and Partnership Specialist in the Community Partnership and Engagement Program, and I am your host for today. Before I go into the agenda, I'd like to cover some basic information and house rules. This summit will be recorded for the benefit of attendees and other stakeholders who are unable to be present. For those who do not wish to be recorded, please take this time to opt out and drop from the session. And a link to access today's recorded session will be sent once it is available. Because of the number of participants on today's webinar, everyone has been muted. We encourage and welcome everybody to utilize the chat. Now, we may not be able to answer all the questions due to the volume of participants, and we do welcome you to share your question by contacting our team at ask.census.gov. Next, for general questions, please visit ask.census.gov or call 301-763-INFO. That is 301-763-4636, or toll free at 1-800-923-8282. You can also request a data dissemination specialist at census.askdata@census.gov or 1-844-ASK-DATA. And finally, any media inquiries regarding apportionment or redistricting should reach out to our Public Information Office at pio@census.gov. So let's begin. What is the objective of our data summits? Well, data summits are designed for the novice data user. The series will present a high-level overview of several data products and demonstrate how they can be used to assist organizations and businesses identify data-driven solutions to help solve challenges. You will also learn about how your responses to Census Bureau surveys are used to create publicly available data products. And at the conclusion of this session, you will have an increased awareness of the vast data products available through the U.S. Census Bureau. You will be better equipped to utilize some of the free online tools available on census.gov, and you will have resources and toolkits to assist with navigating data available through census.gov. We created these summits to thank our many committed 2020 decennial census partners by showing that the value of partnership extends beyond the decennial count. Census Bureau data can help organizations make data-driven decisions. Today's summit is just one example of how the Census Bureau also offers support to help you with accessing and understanding these data. Our agenda includes some opening remarks from our featured partner, Amanda Lee Brozana-Rios, Membership, Leadership, Development, and Communications Director for National Grange in Washington, D.C. We're delighted to have her with us today. I will then introduce our key presenter, Joseph Cortullo, a data dissemination specialist from the Philadelphia Regional Census Center. We will then open the floor for a few additional questions, followed by the presentation wrap-up. Now, before I turn it over to our guest speaker to present her opening remarks, I'd like to provide a high-level update on the 2020 decennial census. As a reminder, today's session will not answer any questions regarding apportionment or redistricting, and questions regarding those topics should be referred to our Public Information Office, again at pio@census.gov. The Census Bureau has been working diligently to process responses and assess quality as we work toward releasing the first results from the 2020 census. Our current schedule points to releasing these apportionment counts by April 30th. and these first results from the 2020 decennial census will include 3 tables of population counts for the nation and each of the 50 states. The apportioned population counts, which are the counts used for apportionment, and they include the resident population for each of the 50 states, plus each state's overseas population count. The resident population count, which includes all people who were living in the United States as of April 1st, 2020, and the overseas population counts, which include each state's overseas population count. And these overseas counts are only used for apportionment. For detailed information on apportionment, including links to our latest updates and informational material, visit the Apportionment Press Kit at the link listed on this slide. And as a friendly reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and please expect a PDF and link for today's presentation complete with the links referenced throughout this session within 48 hours. After the census, shifts in population and congressional representation among the states require the redrawing of district boundaries within states. The Census Bureau provides states with the local area population counts that they need to redraw or redistrict their congressional and other legislative boundaries. Our current schedule points to delivering these data to the states and the public by September 30th, 2021. And for more information on redistricting, including links to geographic support products such as maps, tables, and files, again, visit the Redistricting Press Kit at the link listed on this slide. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Amanda Lee Brozana Rios. Amanda is the Director of Membership, Communications, and Development for the National Grange. She has been with National Grange for a decade and has worked with the Census Bureau as a partner for the last 5 years. Before coming to Grange, Amanda worked as a reporter, so she understands the importance of Census Bureau data to the public. Amanda served from 2015 and 16 as national lecturer and is an active member in Potomac Grange No. 1, Washington, D.C. She and her husband, Victor, were elected into membership at Valley Grange No. 1360 in Pennsylvania in 2018 and look forward to doing many community service projects with that Grange. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm excited to be here today because there are so many reasons that the census, or ways in which the census touches our lives every day. I think everyone who's gathered with us understands a bit about how the census can really influence our daily lives. But for rural communities, sometimes really far flung from the center of action here in DC, it's hard to explain. And it's something that we work very hard at National Grange to do. Let me just take 1 second to back up and explain. The National Grange is a 154-year-old community service-based fraternal organization. We originally started for farmers and farm families in order to bring the nation together after the Civil War. A very, very big job indeed. But our founders saw it as a way to have folks from all parts of the country come together as individuals, as families, and feel they were at equal footing. I think it was a really visionary step. And frankly, with culture today, I think it's something that has come full circle and is really needed again. But we know that rural and urban communities and suburban communities all have their unique needs. And for us at the Grange, our 150,000 members help serve as voices for different programs and projects and things that are important to rural communities, to their neighbors and their friends. And it's a trusted voice because after 154 years of nonpartisan issues-based action, people, when they hear Grange is supporting something or interested in something, tend to see it as something of importance for rural communities, not politically charged. I think that as we partnered with the Census Bureau, not just in this decennial census, but in previous times where the census was being done, and also throughout the years, we've found that the reluctance to provide some information about who is in the household has waned a bit in the communities where Granges are located. Moreover, we've found ways to be able to talk to our neighbors and friends who come from other countries, other communities, who may or may not hold citizenship, about exactly why having them counted and why their American counterparts would like them counted is important. We know that census data helps us not just understand apportionment, but also helps us make sure that there is ample money in treasuries to fund our roads, our bridges, our locks and dams. With the large infrastructure package that will be hopefully coming soon, we know that we want to be able to show exactly how many people are using these different facilities. We want to know that we've got enough money in the pot to cover our local schools. I know, having just traveled to the West Coast near Spokane recently, that I've talked to families who their districts don't have enough schools, even temporary units at the schools, and students are currently having to be homeschooled, being turned away from that public education because there's not enough money, not enough set aside. And that was because either folks were not responding to the census in the way that they need to, or the folks who were making decisions didn't read into what the census numbers were telling them. These are things that we use as examples when we go to communities and talk about why it's so important to make sure to not only take part in the decennial census, but also to take part in other projects and programs that the census has going. Having both worked in newspapers, as you mentioned, and having had friends work at the census, I know how many different products there are that are produced not only out of what you gather every 10 years, but what you're gathering daily. And these are all extremely important insights for us to understand the tone and tenor, the populations with which we're working, and how exactly to make sure that everything that we're putting together, not just for our organization, but for partners like you to be advocates for them, will hit right and will explain what exactly these facts and figures will do to improve quality of life. This is an extremely important work, and more than that, it's extremely important for individuals to know how they can use those census products, because they help individuals who want to become advocates for their communities be able to tell a story about current, past, and future that allows their local government, their representatives to their state or to the national legislatures, understand exactly what the impact of decisions is. And I think that that's an extremely important thing to note as you move forward, talking about some of the data that you've gathered in this decennial census, because we know that there are folks that don't understand sometimes exactly what the federal government does for them, or what different organizations or bureaus do for them. And seeing the massive amount of information that we can gather and really be predictive for a better future for all of us out of the data from the census is a story that we often really like to tell. But these sessions that you're doing here today and in the future are really important to make sure that not just think tanks and groups in the Beltway, but also the people out in local communities understand exactly where they can gather the most correct, accurate, and up-to-date information to understand exactly what their communities look like and their country looks like. And so we thank you for all of the work that you all do. And we thank everybody who's joined us, the nearly 500 people who are on here today, for their interest in understanding exactly what the Census Bureau provides as far as data and as far as material throughout the years that can be used for education, really to just have a much better understanding of life around you. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to present today.
Thank you, Amanda, for that overview. What a wonderful organization, and we thank you and National Grange for your continued partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau. I want to next introduce you to our keynote presenter today. Joseph Cortullo has been with the U.S. Census Bureau for 25 years. He initially served as a geographic specialist, then as a team supervisor for Census 2000. Following that, Joe managed both the current population survey and the American Community Survey as a supervisory survey statistician. In 2008, he was selected as an area manager for the 2010 census, managing 5 local census offices in the DC metro area. Upon returning to the Philadelphia regional office, he acted as a program coordinator, then returned to the supervisory survey statistician position. Since 2015, Joe has been enjoying helping data users and giving presentations and workshops as a data dissemination specialist. It is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Joe Cortullo.
Thank you, Nazreen. I'd like to begin by sharing a perception that I had for a long time. The perception is that the population of rural areas is in decline. I've heard about and read about farmers going out of business, technological change reducing the need for labor in rural industries like fishing or logging or mining. And I've heard that often when college students complete their degree, they don't return to the rural homes of their parents. I'm certain that these factors have influenced declines in some rural areas. However, when looking at the rural population in this visualization, we see that the rural population in the U.S. has really not changed much. This, in spite of the fact that the Census Bureau's definition of rurality has changed, allowing smaller areas that were once identified as rural to be identified as urban. The rural population is holding its own. At the bottom of this chart, you'll see that the rural population is almost flatlined at between 50 and 60 million people for the past 100 years. And after the 2010 census, the rural population was closer to the high part of the range at 59.5 million people. Next slide, please. My objective is to provide a brief history of the Census Bureau's concept of rurality, to look at the sources used for current census data, and to show you how to use 3 relatively easy data tools for what you may think of as a rural area. Then I'll share some additional resources and publications pertaining to rural areas and tell you about a great website we have called the Census Academy, where you can learn much more about census data. Finally, we'll take some questions. Should you have a question during the presentation, please put it into the chat, which is being monitored. Next slide. And next slide. Here's the table of contents. When I get to the data tools demonstration part, I'm going to use some examples of areas that I've always seen as rural. They are Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, famous every February, Mayberry, North Carolina, the setting in the Andy Griffith Show, Monticello, Georgia, the filming location of the movie My Cousin Vinny, and Bethel, New York, where the Woodstock concert took place in 1969. Next slide. So what is rural? Some common physical characteristics of a rural area that we would likely agree on would be low population density, distance between homes, or distance between ranches or farms, distances from large city, isolation, and remoteness. The social experience in rural areas is also likely to be different. Next slide. But to get an understanding, rather an objective understanding of the concept of the Census Bureau's definition of rural, we really have to define what is urban first. And to define urban, we have to understand some basic concepts that have influenced the often fluid definitions of rural and urban. Initially, an urban area was one defined as being within the legal boundaries of an incorporated place. Anything beyond the boundaries of an incorporated place was determined to be rural, even as little as 1/10 of a mile outside of an incorporated place. In incorporated places, the officials are elected, often a mayor, and government services like sanitation, police, and fire services are provided. These legally incorporated places can be referred to as cities, towns, boroughs, or villages. The states use the terms differently. An unincorporated place is a statistical counterpart to an incorporated place. It's not legally defined or recognized. Services are provided by some other entity like the county or a township or a town, or even a nearby incorporated place. The Census Bureau, working with state, county, or regional officials, reviews all unincorporated places once every 10 years and publishes statistics for them. Next slide. Let's put those two terms aside for a minute, incorporated and unincorporated place, and look at a couple other terms that have come to define urban areas. There are two types, urbanized areas and urban clusters. Forgetting the legal boundaries and places, the Census Bureau today uses these other concepts. An urbanized core area is a core of census tracts or blocks that meet a minimum population threshold of 50,000 people. An urban cluster has a lower population threshold, anywhere from 2,500 to 50,000 people. Urbanized areas or clusters may consume all or part of an incorporated place. The Census Bureau delineates the nation's urban areas only once every 10 years after the decennial census is conducted. Currently, and coincidentally, we are in a 3-month window seeking public input and suggestions on defining the criteria for urban areas for the 2020 census. Should you have a desire to comment on the criteria for urban areas, you can access the Federal Register online and search for urban areas, or use the FR number on the screen. The opportunity to provide input will remain available to you until May the 20th. Next slide. So in summary then, incorporated places only were once used to define the concept of urban. We saw the nation's urban area exceed the rural area for the first time in 1920. The concept of urbanized area was first seen after the 1950 census. A population density threshold was used after 1960. In 1980, the term census-designated places replaced the term unincorporated places. And in 2000, urban clusters, which were a population of 2,500 to 50,000, began to be identified as urban. Now we can define the term rural as anything that is not in an urban area, specifically within an urbanized area or urban cluster. Next slide, please. This graphic helps to define these concepts further and introduces two terms, hops and jumps. Hops and jumps provide a means to connect outlying densely settled territory with the main body of an urban area or cluster. A hop provides a connection from one urban area core to another qualifying urban territory along a road connection of a half mile or less in length. Multiple hops may be made along any given corridor. A jump provides a connection from one urban area core to other qualifying urban territory along a road connection that is greater than a half mile, but less than or equal to 2.5 miles. Only one jump may be made along any given road connection. And when connected, the outlying area becomes part of the urbanized area or urban cluster. Next slide, please. This slide depicts some hops and one jump. The rabbit can hop as many times as necessary as long as it can reach a qualifying territory within a half mile. The frog can only jump once from a distance of a half mile to 2.5 miles. These hops or jumps extend the size of both urbanized areas and urban clusters beyond the core population boundary. Next slide. This slide shows the land distribution in terms of urban and rural areas in the United States. The great majority of our nation's landmass is within rural areas. All of the white area on the slide represents rurality. The purple areas are the urbanized areas. The green dots are the smaller urban clusters. Combined, these urban areas represent 3% of the land. Next slide. When we look at the population, not the landmass, but the population distribution of urban and rural America, we see a very different picture. Almost 81% of the population lives within the 3% of the urban areas. The remaining 19% are spread out across the 97% rural areas. Next slide. So let's get back to our definition of rural, and next slide will show us what that is. This is the definition of the Census Bureau's definition of rural. All territory, persons, and housing units not defined as urban. We have a common understanding of this definition now and of what urban is. Hopefully now the presentation will make better sense. And next slide, which is fine, you're right, you're on a good slide now. These are the characteristics of rural areas. Rural, again, is often defined as the residual. Next slide. Now let's look at the country through the level of the states. And we've narrowed down the Census Bureau's definition of rural. Let's examine where the rural population lives. The dark green states on this map represent states that are at least 30% rural. Some of New England states actually have a rural population of over 60%. The light states on the map represent states that have a higher percentage of their population in urbanized areas or urbanized clusters, urban clusters. Next slide. Thinking in terms of county, the county level, we find some variety. Almost a quarter of the counties are completely rural. No urbanized areas, no urban clusters. Most of these, as you can see, are west of the Mississippi. Here we can see the counties that are rural in the majority. Rather, next slide, I'm sorry. Next slide will show us the counties that are rural in the majority, more than half rural. So that's another 30% of the counties are more than half rural. And in the third map are the counties that are mostly urban. So that would be, that's correct. That's the next slide. Next slide. We've been discussing states and counties in these examples, but I want to share with you some of the other geographies that the Census Bureau publishes data for. Here are a few of the more popular ones. You likely recognize most of these, and you'll see urban areas on the right side. Note that because there's a direct line from urban areas to the word nation, urban areas are not limited to state boundaries. An urban area can be in more than one state. Before we look at the sources of data and data tools, this would be a good time to see if any questions have come in from the chat.
Thank you, Joe. We'll take a moment to address a couple of questions now that have come in the chat box. And so the first is, how can this information help my business?
Well, census data is very important when you think of business in terms of you want to know information about your customers and you want to know information about your competitors. And Census data can provide information about both. So if you wanted to target a specific group, say senior citizens, you can find out, look in a specific city or county and see where are most senior citizens likely to be living. And you can target that area more so than the others so that you get a better bang for your buck in terms of reaching the population that you want to reach. And as far as business data, you can look at census business data from the economic census and economic surveys, and you can see the typical payroll of a business in an industry that's similar to yours in your state or in your county, how many people are on average are employed, and lots of other information about your competitors in the same industry. So that's how census data can be helpful to someone that's either thinking about a business or already operating a business. Do you have another question, Susan?
Thank you for that, Joe. That was very helpful. And as a reminder to all participants, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat box, or you can visit ask.census.gov. And certainly your question is important to us, and we will address the questions again at the end of Joe's presentation. With that said, Joe, let's turn the floor back over to you to continue your presentation.
Okay. When most people think about the census and census data, they're thinking about the data that comes from the decennial census. But the Census Bureau conducts other important censuses and surveys. Next slide. There are two other censuses, both conducted every 5 years, the years that end in 2 and the years that end in 7. One is an economic census, which collects information on about 4 million businesses. The other is the Census of Governments. It measures the scope and nature of the nation's over 90,000 state and local governments. The Census Bureau conducts ongoing surveys as well. Over 100 different surveys are conducted on a variety of topics. The oldest survey, conducted since 1942, is the current population survey, which is focused on employment and unemployment and is a main component of the nation's unemployment rate, which you hear about in the media, usually on the first Friday of each month. The CPS is sponsored by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but the Census Bureau collects the data. You'll see a couple other surveys that the Census Bureau conducts. For this webinar, though, we're going to be looking at the Census Bureau's largest survey, the American Community Survey, as well as referring back to the decennial census. Next slide, please. The American Community Survey is large. It includes 3.5 million households and group quarters each year. It's also detailed in the number of topics, and it provides important information not only at the state, county, and place level, but all the way down to the neighborhood level, which we at the Census Bureau call census tracts and block groups. The ACS data is collected in a similar manner than the recently completed 2020 census. Next slide, please. Selected households are mailed a letter or a postcard with a unique code linked to the address and asked to go online to complete the survey. For those that don't complete the survey online, a reminder is sent. If after a set time period the household data is still not collected, a paper questionnaire is mailed. After additional reminders, if the Census Bureau still hasn't collected the data, a census field representative conducts a personal visit. After all three of these modes of data collection have been completed, the data is tabulated at all geographic levels. Sometime within the following year, the data is released. Next slide. For large geographies, such as counties, large places, legislative districts, etc., that have a population of 65,000 people or more, data that has been collected in the previous year is released annually. Recently, this has been occurring in September. The 2019 one-year data is currently available. The 2020 one-year data is scheduled to be released in September. For geographies with populations of between 20 and 65,000 people, a limited number of one-year tables from the previous year is also released. And for smaller geographies with less than 65,000 people, there wouldn't be enough surveys collected in a year to be confident that the data is representative of the population as a whole. For these smaller geographies, the data is collected for a 5-year period, then released each year. The current ACS 5-year data was collected in the 2015 through 2019 timeframe. We call this the 2019 5-year data. The next release of 5-year data, that is data collected from 2016 through 2020, is scheduled for December. Next slide. Oh, you can stay right there. I'm sorry. That's the slide we want. So we've been talking about the ACS and the census and talking about some differences. Let me clarify some of the differences between the two. The decennial census provides the official count and is used to reapportion the House of Representatives. The ACS provides estimates from a sample. The census collected only basic demographic information about persons and a minimum amount of data about each housing unit. The ACS is much more detailed and collects information on social, economic, housing, and demographic characteristics. The census produces population and housing totals. The emphasis on the ACS is to look at the population and housing characteristics. The decennial census publishes data once every 10 years, while the ACS publishes its sample estimates each year. Finally, the census is all about a point in time. For the 2020 census, that point in time was April the 1st. The ACS is about a period of time, either a 1-year period or a 5-year period, as was described in the previous slide. Next slide. Here you see some of the topics that are collected in the ACS. The items in red were the only items collected in the 2020 census. In addition to all the demographic characteristics, the ACS collects important additional information on social characteristics of the population, such as statistics on disability or education. It also collects economic characteristics like income and information about occupation and industry for workers. And it collects data on our nation's housing, like the cost of utilities and the age of housing. As you can see, the ACS is much more detailed in the topics that it collects. Next slide. And next slide. Here's 3 data tools that I'm going to show you today. These tools are easy to use and don't require any prerequisite or mapping skills. The first that I'll show you is QuickFacts. Here are some of its abilities. It can compare up to 6 geographies at a time, and you can get tables, charts, some basic mapping, and dashboards from QuickFacts. The one caveat of QuickFacts is it's limited to geographies of 5,000 people or more. The second tool I'm going to show you is the ACS Narrative Profiles. The narrative profiles have no population minimum, and we're going to see the data come to us in a narrated text way with tables and bar graphs also, but the emphasis is on the narrated text. And the ACS Narrative Profiles can give us data for several different types of geographies and uses the 5-year data sets, the current of which was the 2019 5-year data set. Finally, we'll look at the data.census.gov, which is the most comprehensive tool, has all the ACS data sets and gives us geographic profiles. There's no size restriction, and it has more of a sophisticated use of mapping and downloading. Next slide. Just a picture of QuickFacts. As I said, it gives us tables, maps, and graphs. We'll take a closer look at them. Next slide. Here's a picture of the narrative profiles where the data comes to us in a textual format. And next slide. This is a picture of data.census.gov where we can get tables and manipulate tables, download tables, etc., and take the data and put it into thematic maps. So I'm going to go online at this time and show you these tools. So I'm requesting the ability to share. Okay, thank you. I first want to show you quick facts. Let me do it this way. I'll go to www.census.gov/quickfacts. There are other ways to get here, but this is the way I'll show you today. Now, let's take a look at quick facts. Give you a minute to look that over. In quick facts, we have a lot of information about the specific geography. The default is always the United States. So, as I said, it could also provide tables and maps, etc. I'm going to show you some quick facts. We'll take a look at some quick facts for a couple geographies. One is Jefferson County, Pennsylvania, which is where, as I mentioned earlier, Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania is located. So I'm going to pull up Jefferson County, Pennsylvania, and as you can see now, a second column of data was put up there for Jefferson County. Let's look at a couple of the data points in here to get a little bit more familiar with them. Let's look at the percentage of persons over 65 and compare that to the percentage in the United States. Well, here you can see that Jefferson County has higher percentage of seniors than the United States average overall, has 21.5% of the population there is seniors, whereas in the US it's 16.5%. Let's look at another characteristic, and this comes from the ACS. We know that from the 2015 to 2019 here. This is the percentage of foreign-born. Here we see a significant difference with the average percentage of foreign-born population in the country at almost 14%, but in Jefferson County, Pennsylvania, it is shy of 1%. And let's look at another item here having to do with educational attainment. What percentage of adults 25 and older have a bachelor's degree or higher? And you can see it's significantly lower in Jefferson County than the national average of 32%. But I said I wanted information about Punxsutawney, not Jefferson County. So I'm going to pull up Punxsutawney, put in the first few letters, and we get that. Now we're going to get a third column up here, and we can get data on what I determined to be a rural area, which is Punxsutawney. However, when I checked, the entire Punxsutawney borough is in an urban cluster. So here's an example of something I thought was very rural, but it's in an urban cluster. And we can look at those same three items in this one. Well, the percentage of seniors in Punxsutawney is pretty much similar to the county. The percentage of foreign-born in Punxsutawney, again, is pretty much similar to the county. And the percentage of the other item, which was the education item, is a little bit higher than the county. So here we have three different geographies, the nation, Jefferson County, and Punxsutawney. You can put up to 6 geographies here in quick facts. And you can also work with maps and charts. And I want to show you that very quickly. In order to work with the mapping in quick facts, all you have to do is click on map. And then it's asking me, what do you want to map? Do you want to map at the county level, the borough level, or if it was possible, the national level? I'm going to map at the county level. So I clicked on Jefferson County, and we have a map at the county level. it's going to provide me with a map of all the counties in Pennsylvania, with Jefferson County highlighted in red. And currently, it's mapping the population estimate. So the darkest of the areas here, the darkest of the counties here are have the highest population. You can see them down in the southeastern part of the state and some along on the southwestern part of the state. Here is a legend down the bottom, which shows us what the colors truly represent. And you can see that there's some counties in Pennsylvania that are have a very small population estimate. But you can actually map other characteristics, not only population estimates, just by looking at this. So if we wanted to map the percentage of Hispanic in these same counties, we just change the variable to percentage Hispanic or Latino, as we see up top here. And we could see that, and also I should say, we have our legend again at the bottom. We could see that the darker counties here, like Berks and Lehigh, Monroe, have a higher percentage of Hispanics than the lighter colored counties, most of which are in the north and in the west. So we could say that the concentration of Hispanics, based upon this map, lies in this part of the state of Pennsylvania. So this is how you use quick facts. You can take the data in a table, you could take it in a map, you could also take it in a chart. And when you take it in a chart, the county that you had selected is at the top, then all of the remaining counties follow suit, and you can scroll down. So here we see Jefferson County, because when I put the cursor on that blue bar, it tells me Jefferson County, 9.9% Hispanic. And then when we get into some of the other counties like Berks, which includes Reading, 22%. And we look at some of the other counties like Lehigh, 26%. So you can take quick facts and take the data in a table format, a map format, or a chart format. And finally, you can put it in a dashboard, which would give you all three. If you wanted to download this, put it in a report or something like that, you can take quick facts and put it in a map form, and you'll get all three. You'll get the table, the map, and the graph. If you wanted to share this, you just simply click on more. Of course, you could print it. You can download the table in a CSV file. You can email what you see on the screen. You can embed it in another website or share it on social media. So Quick Facts has a lot of features. Does not give you all the data points by any means, but it does have a lot of features, and it's especially easy to use. The next data tool that I wanted to show you is data.census.gov. I'm sorry, the next one I want to show you is the American Community Survey Narrative Profiles. And how I got to this screen is www.census.gov/ACS. The American Community Survey has its own page with lots of information. But I'm interested here in data. So I'm going to click on data. And I'm going to go with data, tables, and tools. Now I'm in the narrative profile section, and I want to click on narrative profile, but the place that I want to select is the other rural area that I mentioned, Mayberry, North Carolina. Well, I went and did that for this exercise to while I was preparing, and I found out there is no Mayberry, North Carolina, and that Andy Griffith used his hometown of Mount Airy, North Carolina, as a model for the show. So since we don't have a Mayberry, North Carolina, we can find Mount Airy, North Carolina, and we'll use that as an example of what a narrative profile looks like. So again, I went to www.census.gov/ACS, clicked on data, and now it's asking me select a geography type. Well, Mount Airy is a city, so I'm going to put that in place there and select my state, which is North Carolina. and select my city, which I have to scroll down a bit to find Mount Airy. And there we go. I'm going to get a narrative profile. So click on that button, narrative profile. This is going to be a written account, mostly a written account of some of the demographic, economic, social, and housing characteristics of Mount Airy, North Carolina. And this is what a narrative profile looks like. So it gives you a lot of the data right in narrative form. So you don't have to worry about tables and charts and anything like that. You can get a lot of the data right here just by reading. But it does also provide bar graphs and tables. You click on this and you'll get the same data in a table format. So what does the narrative profile provide data on? It provides data on lots of different topics. For example, the nativity and foreign-born characteristics of Mount Airy City, plus what location in the world did the foreign-born population come from? And you can see that here. It provides data on education, disability, the industries in Mount Airy City, occupations, information on commuting to work, and income. Not only does it provide the median household income, which was $38,000, but it also provides data on the income distribution of households. So here we see the American Community Survey narrative profiles, and we always get a population pyramid. So any geography, there is no limit on the size here. You can find a narrative profile for a municipality with 100 people in it, and it will provide you the ACS data for that municipality. There is one other thing I want to mention while we're in the ACS page, though. This is really comprehensive, is the data profiles. If you click on data profiles, and we could do this we'll do this one for a county, any county really. We'll go to Alabama, whatever's first here. If you click get profile links, you get 4 different links to tables that have lots of information on whatever geography you selected. Some of these tables have 50 to 100 more pieces of information. So if I were to take one of these, say the housing characteristics, I can see that it gives me the data for the state, but I was interested in Ottawa County here. So these are the housing characteristics, lots of information about housing in Ottawa County, starting here with the estimates and the number of units in each structure, when the homes were built, the number of rooms, bedrooms, all kind of information about housing, vehicles available, type of fuel, value of housing, mortgage status, just about anything you could think of in terms of housing. And you can get, there are 4 of these different data profiles. You can get these in the ACS narrative profiles, as well as in data.census.gov, because this is actually a table that comes from the data.census.gov tool. So let me show you data.census.gov. This would be, and we're in data.census.gov now. So I will start afresh here. When you go into data.census.gov, this is the screen you see. And you can just take a specific geography. I wanted to use Monticello, Georgia, because that is the other area that I always perceived as being rural. And I can get data about Monticello, Georgia in data.census.gov. I can get those comprehensive profiles in data.census.gov as well. The final area that I wanted to show you, rather the final tool that I want to show you a little bit more closer, data.census.gov. I'm going to work this from the beginning now. And I'm going to look up information for Bethel, New York, which is a town in New York. And this data.census.gov, I want to say it's the newest tool that we have. It's about a year old. It replaced a tool that was around for a long time, which was known as American Fact Finder. So I'm going to try to get information about Bethel, Bethel, New York. There's several ways I could do that. I could just type in Bethel, New York here, and I'd get lots of tables and things about Bethel. But I want to show you the advanced search because I want to work with the filters a little bit. And one of the things I know about Bethel, New York, it's not an incorporated place, but it's a town. And in New York State, towns are considered as county subdivisions. So I'm going to go into county subdivisions. That's the geography I want to work with. And of course, I want to work within the state of New York. And Bethel is in Sullivan County. And here we go. I can select any one of the county subdivisions in Sullivan County. But for purposes of this demonstration, first, I want to select Bethel. Remember, this is where Woodstock took place in 1969. So I'm hypothetically now, I'm a traffic planner. So I want to get information on Bethel about how do people go to work? Do they drive? Do they take the bus? Do they take Uber? Do they take any other kind of transportation? That's collected in the American Community Survey. There's a question for workers on how do you get to work. So I have already filtered for Bethel. You can see the chip down the bottom. Now I'm going to filter for employment, commuting. And those are the two areas that those are the two filters that I wanted to pull up. I'm sorry. And I'm going to click search. Now I'm going to get one statistic here, the average time it takes for Bethel residents to go to work. But I'll also get lots of different tables. This is strictly limited now to Bethel, New York. And you can get an idea, lots of different tables that come from the American Community Survey having to do with working and commuting. There's actually 124 tables. There's also data.census.gov provides us with maps and different articles and things which are called pages. But I'm working with this table. I want to know, how do people in Bethel get to work? And I'm going to select the first table to see if that's helpful. And it looks like it is. And here's the data here. Means of transportation to work. This is for workers 16 years old and over. And you could see that the great majority of people in Bethel drive to work, either drive alone or drive in a car, truck, or van or carpool. Very few take public transportation. It's likely because there's not a very good public transportation system there. And then you could see other ways that people have answered that they go to work in Bethel. Now, when we look at these ACS tables in data.census.gov, we have to remember one thing. These are estimates. And because they're estimates, they always provide a margin of error. So what this says is that the estimate is 88.5% of people go to work by car, truck, or van, plus or minus 6.8%. So that could be as little as 82%, and it could be as big as 94%. Taking the margin of error into consideration. Then we have a further breakdown. In this specific chart, we have a further breakdown by gender, male or female, how people go to work. But we'll concentrate on here, the estimate and the margin of error for the total population. You can do some work with this table, though. You don't have to accept it as it is. You can go to Customize Table. If you're not interested in the margin of error, or you want to just have the estimate and you're going to keep the margin of error on the side, you could toggle that away just by clicking margin of error. And when you click margin of error, that it goes away for the whole table. You could also transpose the table, which means putting the data that's on the top on the side and putting the data that's on the side on the top. For some tables, that may work well. For this table, it would make the table awkward. You can download the table. You can also import the table. For example, just by clicking here and put copy with headers, or export the table. I'm sorry, let's export the table into Excel. If we clicked here, it would export this table into Excel. So you can easily take this data and export it as well. So one other thing I wanted to show you about data.census.gov is you can make thematic maps on any of these topics. So, and I clicked customize table, that gave me all these buttons here. I'm going to click on map. But I don't want data just for Bethel. I want data for all of the towns in Sullivan County. So let me back up here and change my geography from just Bethel to county subdivision again, state New York again, Sullivan County again. But this time I want all county subdivisions within Sullivan County, New York. I'm going to close that. See how my filter has changed to all county subdivisions. So I have Bethel because that's the first alphabetically, but I have Callicoon and all the other towns that lie within Sullivan County, New York. I want to map this data, and what I want to map is the percentage of people that take public transportation. So I'm going to click on map. Now the data item that I want to map is not total workers. That's what we see originally. That's the default. But I want to map people that take public transportation. So that would be workers 16 and over that take public transportation. So here we have a thematic map of persons in Sullivan County, New York, which includes Bethel. And we could see, looking at the legend up here, that the darker counties, more people take public transportation, between 3% and 4%. And the very lightest counties, very few people take public transportation, 0 to 0.5%. If we were to look at this statistic for Staten Island or Manhattan, the number of people that take public transportation will be 50, 60% maybe, or even more. But this just gives you an idea, using this as an example, that you can take subdivisions in a county, or you could do this for counties in a state, or for all the states, or for census tracts within a county. You can do this for lots of different geographic areas, and you can easily produce a thematic map for that. So that is the presentation I wanted to show you. That is the third tool that I wanted to show you, and that has to do with data.census.gov. So I showed you three tools, again, Quick Facts, the ACS Narrative Profiles, and data.census.gov. So I think I want to turn it back to Susan now to see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Joe. What wonderful insight, and certainly very helpful data products and tools. And yes, we have time for a couple of questions, and we do have a bunch of questions in the chat box. So we'll start with one that is a recurring question here. And is there information for areas with populations of under 5,000?
Yes. It's not in Quick Facts. That's the only place that you won't find it, but you will find it in data.census.gov, and you will find it in the narrative profiles, even as small as population of 100 or less. So there's only Quick Facts has that one particular limit to it. Any other questions?
Yes, so another question, and do any of the tools show you specifically that it is in an urban cluster? Can you show where you are getting that information?
Well, I can show that. let's see, I'm going to go, because I happen to know that the table for that is called P2. So I'm going to go to data.census.gov and click on P2. It's going to give me data about you. Let's use an area, for example. I can't think of anything, but how about Albany, New York? Let's see if Albany, New York is any of it is urban or if any of it is rural. So I chose my topic here, but I didn't choose my filter yet. I'm going to click on filter, geography, and we'll go to place, and then Albany, in New York, and find Albany. You can do this for any geography. So now I've selected my geography and I'm working with table P2. And this is only in the decennial census table. So I'm only going to get data for 2010. When the urban and rural areas are defined soon after the 2020 census, we'll have the 2020 data in here. So now with my filter, I should get a table P2, filtering out Albany, New York, which it is, and it tells me that the entire city is in an urbanized area. No surprise there, right? But you can find cities that are part rural. But in this case, this is how you can find the breakdown of any geography. Go to data.census.gov, type in table P2, and then select your geography, and you'll be able to see how much of that geography is in urbanized areas, urban clusters, or in rural. Another question? Is there another question?
We have time for one more question. And folks, if you have dropped a question into the chat box, we will respond to you either by email or by phone call. So your question is important. So our final question, Joe, does the narrative profile include any historical facts?
No, it does not. It's updated annually. Now you can get historical information from data.census.gov back and through 2010 for the American Community Survey, and it also has data for census. I believe it has data for census 2010 as well. Actually, we can look right here by just filtering for the years. And you can see these are the years that data.census.gov has data for right now. So all of these from 2019 all the way down through 2010 would be American Community Survey data. 2010 and 2000 will be the decennial data, and soon we'll have the 2020 data in there as it's released. So I hope that answers your question.
Very good. Thank you so much. We do appreciate that. And there are many ways you can learn more about our data dissemination services, and we're happy to continue on with the presentation. And we're going to talk to you a little bit about how we can bring our data experts to you. And as that slide is coming up, again, there are many ways that you can learn more, and we certainly do encourage you to do so. You can request a free data training for your organization, or subscribe to receive data gems, which are short how-to videos that are an easy and quick way to increase your knowledge of census data. And best of all, you can get them all delivered straight to your inbox, or you can take a class. You simply log on to gain access to any of our data courses where you can learn at your own pace with video tutorials, and best of all, they are designed for every skill level. And finally, we welcome you to interact with our instructors via webinars just like today's and learn about our data releases and the data tools while attending live virtual classes. And the Census Bureau has a team of specialists who can assist in bringing the world of data to you by providing trainings, workshops, and presentations to you and your organization, all at no cost. Our team offers presentations and trainings tailored to your organization's needs on a variety of census data tools, data sets, and programs both virtually and in person, and of course, when it is safe to resume to do so. And as our Data Summit series continues, we have many data summits that we are presenting through August. You can find all of this information on the 2021 Data Summit page. Begin by visiting census.gov, then in the search bar at the top, and you can see that outlined in red. Simply type in 2021 Data Summit Series to land on the page seen on the slide. And there are currently 19 options. To view them all, please be sure to click Show More. Look to see which one suits your needs, then simply click to register. It is certainly a one-stop shop. And we value your feedback, and there are 3 ways to tell us what you think about today's session. First, be on the lookout for a post-summit email with a general question about your experience today. Please take the time to reply immediately. And you may also contact your regional office via phone call or an email. And of course, as you have been doing over the past year, please connect with your local partnership specialist with any questions or comments that you may have. We are here for you. And the entire team of the Census Bureau is here for you. Again, this slide deck will be sent to you within 48 hours of the conclusion of the presentation, and you will have one-click access to the data tools and products we've discussed here today, as well as the contacts in your region that I will next introduce you to. And if you are seeking additional information or wish to connect with our data dissemination specialist or partnership specialist in your area, please contact in Atlanta, George Grandy Jr., and in our Chicago regional office, Marilyn Sanders. Kathy Lacey leads the Denver regional office, and Julie Lamb is in our Los Angeles office. Ian Hall is the acting regional director for the New York region, and finally, Fernando Armstrong leads the Philadelphia region. Thank you all so very much for joining us for today's summit, Accessing Census Bureau Data for Rural Communities. I would like to thank Amanda Lee Brozana Rios for her time today and Joe Cortullo for his expertise today. And before we close out today's session, I'd like to review our objectives for the summit, which were to increase awareness of the vast data products available through the U.S. Census Bureau, to be better equipped to utilize some of the free online tools available on census.gov, and to have resources and toolkits to assist with navigating data available through census.gov. There has been a wealth of information shared with you today, and we want you to leave this webinar with the inspiration to spread the word that data are for everyone from all walks of life. Thank you for joining us today, and please expect a PDF and resource sheet for today's presentation within 48 hours. A separate link to access today's recorded session will be sent once it is available. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.